Hello, our truth warriors. Today's guest is going to be discussing with us a topic which myself and many out there have brought up several times now, and there's still lots and lots of questions to be asked. He is the man behind the documentary Frankenskies, which can be seen on frankenskies.com, and the link will be in the description of this interview. His website is a great source of information, and I encourage anybody to educate themselves on this. So it's a big warm welcome to the Atlantic Underground podcast, Mr. Matt Landman. Hello, sir.
Hello. Thank you so much, Chris, for having me on. I appreciate the time.
No, it's a pleasure. And this really is a topic that we want to discuss and get onto because there's still a lot of questions that need answering. Now, Matt, your documentary now, I believe, is around about 7 years ago. And is that information as important today as when it was made?
Oh, indeed. Well, the documentary starts off in the 1920s, and it goes through the historical chronology of how we got to where we're at. You know, if we jump all the way to present day and you don't have the background, I mean, you don't have the knowledge of how we did it, and it's easy to dismiss, you know. But once you see how the military industrial complex, Air Force, and the powers that be sharpened their tools and got to, evolve to be doing now what they're doing, then it makes much more sense, and you can sink your teeth into it. It's much more palpable and easier to digest.
Yeah.
So yes, very much so.
What was the driving force behind you to do this? Because there's always something that gets under somebody's skin, and it's like, I'm going to do this. What was the driving force for you that really pushed this?
Well, the driving force for me was that I didn't find anything on the internet that I could share with my people. So I first woke up to chemtrails working on a farm, and I never knew. I thought I knew so much. I'd gone to university and done all these different walks of life, and I knew some truths. I knew about 9/11 at least,
Yeah.
but I worked on this farm where we were 4 years into a very intense drought in Northern California, and we were expecting rain. And this big storm forecast 1 week of rain, big black storm cloud coming off the ocean where I lived in Northern California. And we were out harvesting squash and pumpkins so that the vegetables wouldn't rot in the field with the rain coming.
Yeah.
Well, on the edge of this storm came about 20 planes, and they zigzagged the sky. And this is in a very rural area where there's sparse air traffic.
Yeah.
So on a given day, I'd see one plane or something in a whole day of working. But all of a sudden, and this is important because statistically it was an anomaly. It was an irregular uptick in air traffic on the edge of the storm. So already we're dealing with something that's statistically, scientifically, numerically important. It's a statistical anomaly there. And what happened was the planes were leaving these persistent linear cirrus contrails formations, making clouds, it seemed like, on the back of the planes. And they zigzag the sky, and the storm goes over and doesn't drop any rain.
Oh.
I literally just didn't know what I was witnessing. And so I scratched my head and kept on working. But shortly thereafter, a friend said the word chemtrails to me. And I said, "What's that?" And he's like, "Matt, you don't know what that is? You're the one that put me on to 9/11 Truth," because there's documentaries and stuff that I've been sharing. And I was very vocal about that. There's movie Zeitgeist and movie Loose Change. And I was really adamant about people being aware of that truth. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I lived there when 9/11 happened and had my girlfriend living in New York City at the time. I was very emotionally involved. And at first I thought it was, terrorism and whatnot. But then once I learned through documentaries and discussions and, watching and opening that whole can of worms, I realized that, obviously that it was a nefarious government plot, all that sort of stuff in 9/11. So in this instance, I had no idea. So I started looking on the internet, like, did I not know something? What are chemtrails? And when I started digging down that rabbit hole, I found a lot of misinformation. I found a lot of things that weren't shareable. And I found documentaries that I didn't think did it do justice. I'm from the DC area, I've got friends that work in government, Northrop Grumman, different government contractors, and they're very dense They're not going to watch something that is speculative or done poorly.
Yeah.
So there's this concept called, and don't mind me, sorry. There's this concept called the turd in the punch bowl, where
Mhm.
you can have this amazing party, right? Everybody's there having a great time. But if there's a turd in the punch bowl, that's all they're going to talk about for years. No one's going to remember anything else, right? It's going to discredit your party. So
Yeah.
these documentaries and films that had already existed regarding chemtrails, they had instances in them where it was easy to dismiss because nothing was scientifically based, or someone would be videoing a dead bush, and maybe the bush was dead from chemtrails, but it's corollary and there was no proof. And people would say it's because of the lines in the sky. And my friends back home, my family, my peers, they would all dismiss this
Yeah.
and say I was a nutter. And so I really wanted something that I could be proud of to share with the world and have people have a resource. So it took me some time, but eventually I realized I had to be the one making the movie, and I did exactly that and came out with something that I feel is shareable for anybody of any walk of life, even my grandmother, anybody that is interested and wants to open their mind to the topic. It's there and available for them, and it's everywhere. It's on BitChute, Rumble, Odyssey, all that sort of stuff. I mean, maybe the major video platforms have kind of pulled it with censorship and whatnot, but it's widely available for anyone and everyone. And even just watching the first 15 minutes, I've had coworkers that I finally sit down after years, and after 10 minutes in, they're just scratching their head because it's not my footage, it's not my voiceover. This is military stock footage, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. By the time you get to the 60s, and they're flooding the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Vietnam on purpose with cloud seeding,
Yeah.
and now there's forest fires, and they don't even talk about making it rain over them and whatnot. People open their eyes and hearts and minds to it and start to look up and wake up.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you mentioned there about censorship. Have you faced a lot of censorship on the media platforms to stop you presenting this evidence in regards to the geoengineering?
During the lockdowns, especially, yes, it was slow and steady. Like noticed I was getting shadow banned and this and that, but during the lockdowns, I lost a lot. On Well, I'll talk about a few different platforms. On TikTok, I had a really big followership, which I just built that one up recently, but it was going really well. And on there is no hashtag for chemtrails. You can't even, it just is blank. You can't do it. But people rose to the occasion and used the hashtag Frankenskies, which I was very, it, my heart, I loved that. I thought it was just the sweetest thing when I saw that there was hundreds of thousands of people that had already done that before I was even on the platform. But I lost that one, and that was sad. I also lost my Instagram recently, which was sad, and my YouTube channel, which got pulled during the lockdowns, where Frankenskies was there with all the views and all the comments and all of that from the 2017 release. That was especially heartbreaking. I had so many videos on there and such a viral following, and yeah, I have had a lot of censorship. So then that motivated me though to make my own websites, frankenskies.com, actualactivists.com, and I'm still plugging along. I do still have a Facebook page, highly shadow banned, but I do have about 85,000 followers on there, and still plugging along, and I'm very thankful that still exists.
Yeah. Yeah, we've lost, well, we've had two of our channels terminated with YouTube.
Mm.
Again, through the whole pandemic thing, and yeah, they're pretty keen to silence different opinions. But you know what? I'm going to try this interview today on YouTube. Let's play the game with them and see exactly what they think. So if you're watching this on YouTube now, congratulations, it's still up. But if you're finding that the link doesn't work, you know that they've hit us again and they're trying to ban us. But we'll see. Now, Matt, I've been around aircraft all my life. I've been flying light aircraft, gliders, microlights, and helicopters. So I've had great access to aircraft, all parked up at airports. I've operated from them. I'm really interested in aircraft. So, when I'm around them and when I'm at major airports, I take a good look at them. And, I'm not seeing anything that alarms me. There's nothing retrofitted to them. And I also have family and friends that are in the aircraft manufacturing industry with the likes of Airbus and Boeing. They're on product support, so they're working on aircraft that are broken as well. Now, there's nothing at all on the commercial aircraft that they're building and maintaining that is in relation to the ability to spray these skies. Is this something that is only being used by the military and not commercial airlines?
Well, that's a great question, and I get that a lot. To be able to convey the message of chemtrail truth to your friends, family, and peers, people want to know the who, what, why, where, when, and how, because they're going to be asked these questions.
Yeah.
And the who, which I think is part of what you're asking, it's a big that's already a big rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So the commercial airlines aren't really involved, and though some planes, if you zoom in on them that are spraying, they do have commercial logos on them. So the planes, when they're getting older, they do auction them off and sell them, and I believe that they're gobbled up by these chemtrail spraying programs, and then they're gutted and used, and they put the compressed aerosols on them and outfit them to spray. But also a lot of drones are used. Where I live, there's bases that aren't even on a map, and it's obvious that the trajectory, they're only about 100 miles apart, these bases, and they're using drones and NASA patented 1970 barium release rockets and some larger planes, but they're not going into public airfields or public air bases or airports or anything like that. And so it's very covert. So the WHO, one of the WHOs is NASA. And people don't really like this answer, but I'm sorry for the NASA lovers out there. NASA has a budget now of 90 million US dollars per day.
Huh.
While you're sinking your teeth into that, I want to back up to 9/11. After 9/11, half of the budget out of the US Congress, our Senate and our Congress and whatnot, it went in black ops. Half of the budget where the politicians sign the budget for things, half of it is top secret. So they don't even know where they're signing their checks for. And the Department of Energy is also deeply involved. There's a tropospheric aerosol program that was launched just before 9/11. And it details a lot of this, but all in secret. And so you've got the Department of Energy, you've got the U.S. Air Force and different other government air forces and whatnot. But NASA having a budget of $90 million per day, they have a public program called CARE, which is a chemtrail program, and they don't care. It's an acronym that stands for the Charged Aerosol Release Experiment, where you can look it up online, and they make noctilucent clouds. How do they make noctilucent clouds? With sprayers on different planes and drones and all this different stuff that they claim is research. And what do they spray? Aluminum, barium, and strontium. And this matches the patents and matches the rainwater analyses and the soil samples and the hair testing and all this sort of stuff, where scientists and activists and truth seekers have gotten involved and tried to dig into all of it. So it's not just NASA, but if you just wrap your head around a budget of $90 million per day, and a lot of the stuff that they say they're doing is false, with all of their space exploration and all that, whatever they claim to be doing. And the chemtrail program is real. And, then you have to get to the question of like, well, why would NASA? Well, they're being paid to do so by the government under the guise of you're saving the world from global warming, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But also there's some, and then the people involved are on a need to know basis, and they're compartmentalized and all this sort of stuff. But no, the commercial airlines, which is a common mistake. People think, oh, the commercial airlines must be spraying, because I zoomed in and I saw, people have like good cameras, and they zoom in and they see a plane, Ryanair or EasyJet or whatever it is, in your neck of the woods. Over here, it's often Virgin Air or UPS or FedEx or something like that. These are old gutted planes, and very smart of them to leave the logos on them, because then it gets people questioning and thinking, oh, well, I just got to go to my airport and I'll find, some proof of this, which you won't find.
Yeah.
So that's my answer to that one.
Yeah. Because like I have people constantly messaging me from the UK, sending me photographs, or I'll see the posts on social media. Where we are here, we're in Mexico currently, and people that I know in the area, I'll go and meet them for lunch, or we'll catch up somewhere in a store or whatever, and they'll point at the sky and they'll say to me, "Oh, look at all the chemtrails today! It's absolutely insane." And people here, where I am particularly, are becoming very obsessed with this. Now, we do live within an hour's drive of a major airport, and we do have the flight paths coming over where we are. But, you know, they'll say constantly, look at these chemtrails in the sky. Now, I can pinpoint myself the very aircraft flying through the sky through the likes of the flight tracker apps and the websites. So I know where the plane has come from. I know exactly where it's going. I know who the aircraft belongs to in regards to the company. And they are just general passenger commercial flights. But I am seeing the trails behind them. Would it be a fair assumption that not all trails in the sky are chemtrails, and the majority of what people are thinking are chemtrails are just the natural condensation that will come from a jet engine?
Well, I'd like to back up and question. So this is a very big agenda. Okay, so if you've got Bill Gates involved, which he is very much involved, if
Mhm.
you do the research,
Yeah.
and then you've got the military-industrial complex, which is unlimited budget. I mean, they just hit the printing press and they can print as much money as you want. NASA, like I said, $90 million a day. Now, if you let's pretend, because I like to put myself, because it's very difficult to grasp, like, why would they even do this and why would they do it to themselves, all this sort of stuff. You've got to sit in these evil boardrooms with
Mhm.
like these think tanks and grasp what is actually going on. They plan this out for quite some time. Now, if you were an evil trillionaire, I think that you would probably own the flight app, right? And you would and
Possible,
you
yeah.
would probably, yeah, and you would probably trick people into thinking that these are normal aircraft. The engines that these planes are outfit with are very efficient. They're high bypass turbofan jet engines. They're 2 tons of titanium and steel. They're very well maintained. If you research 9/11, they just evaporated into the buildings, but which is impossible. But these things are spinning turbines creating lift over the wing, and they're not blasting the hot air that we're told. And so the idea of a persistent contrail coming out of these is bollocks. It doesn't make any sense. It's unscientific, and if you dig deep enough, you'll realize that anything that you see that's persisting is a condensed aerosol, usually heavy metals, and if they're able to outfit passenger jets and have it where they're filling in the gaps or they have some sort of additive in the fuel or something like that, then possibly some of these commercial airlines are being utilized. But I think honestly that the flight app, the tracking apps, and all that sort of stuff, I would be willing to say that these are compromised.
Yeah.
This is this is most likely where we're going with it. I mean, with a conspiracy this vast and to be able to keep the public in the dark to such a degree, you've got airline pilots, airline mechanics, all these people who would definitely not say this is true, that there's no such thing as chemtrails. I think it's because they've done such a good job keeping everyone in the dark, because this is like dominance on a global scale. This is disrupting sunlight for all of humanity. It looks to be kind of like a spiritual battle if you get to the really nitty gritty of it, trying to quell our spiritual awakening so as to buy time to push us into a transhumanism agenda kind of thing. I mean, it depends on how willing you are, or how down the rabbit hole, or how awake you are, or where you are in your truth journey, how much you're willing to really recognize all this. But you know, to look at the flight app on your phone and to take that as fact, I think is just kind of, no offense, a little naive. I'm still just now realizing that likely, Bill Gates founded and owns the flight apps and whatnot. And
Yeah.
if you really tracked it, you'd see that those planes are going right over the airport and going to the next little base and whatnot. But we don't have the proper tracking mechanisms, and we're very like sincere, open-hearted humans, and we're excited to have this tracking app and whatnot. But I looked it up today, and the app's got like millions of downloads. And it's a very public, like mainstream thing, and I would think that something so mainstream would be highly compromised at this point.
Yeah. I mean, my background is an engineer. I've been around vehicles and fully qualified as a mechanic. Now, I'm also, again, got friends that have been in the military as aircraft engineers as well. Now, I'm well aware that if I'm in the UK or Canada and the weather's cold enough and I start that vehicle up, that what and I've seen huge clouds come out the back of the car and thought, oh shit, there's something wrong with the engine. But then I realized that the temperature is just at the right temperature for where that vehicle sucks the air into the engine, the fuel goes in, it's combusted, and then what we have is moisture coming out. Now, I'm well aware that the jet engines work on what they call a suck, squeeze, bang, blow mechanism, where the compressor blades of the jet engine will suck the air in, it will compress it right down, and those blades are to compress it to almost like a turbocharger operates. It's forced induction through. Then they have the bang, which is the fuel being injected in and the ignition of the fuel, and then that causes the force of the jet engine to blow out the back, and this is where all that power comes from in order to move these enormous birds that we see flying in the sky. We have within the air that's being compressed moisture, and also within the fuel itself there's moisture. So at the point of ignition, when this is burnt, the same as a car engine, why wouldn't we see any kind of moisture coming out the back of these engines?
Well, we can, but not persistent. I mean, when you're driving your car down the street, do you see a trail that leaves a line all day long? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I
That's
know,
really the
yeah, and I've seen it with varying temperatures as well. And I've actually watched aircraft in the sky flying over, and some people will say, well, that's where they've turned the chemtrails on and turned them off. But I'm also kind of putting it to the analogy that if I go swimming in the ocean, I can swim, I'll hit a very cold spot, then I'll hit a warm spot. And I'm very aware from what we had to learn when we were flying aircraft that we do hit pockets of air, and that's why people have turbulence on aircraft. So there are hot and cold pockets in the sky as well. So again, the temperature as it changes during the air, and I've seen planes fly through, and all of a sudden I'll see something coming out the back and then it'll stop. But I'll also see clouds forming in that area, which kind of alludes to the fact that it's possibly a temperature change up there. And at the point of temperature change, that is condensing any kind of moisture that's coming out of those engines. Would that be a possibility in that regards?
yes, but I would just like yes, definitely, but I would still think that it would produce a dissipating contrail just as it did in the past.
Yeah,
And if you keep your eye on the sky, you'll often see planes side by side, even,
yeah,
and one will be doing something completely different than the other. It takes a lot of observation, and I mean that's how hypotheses are tested and dismantled and whatnot. But if you keep your eye to the sky, you'll see identical aircraft side by side, and they're going through the same atmosphere. And one will be emitting a persistent linear cirrus cloud formation that lasts for hours,
yeah,
and one will be emitting a short contrail that dissipates after seconds.
yeah,
I believe that the contrail of of the dissipating one is normal air traffic, and the other one is something more experimental and nefarious, if that makes sense. And I love your analogy of the pockets of water in the ocean. That all makes perfect sense. But it's like if you take the air engines that they have, they're not producing enough heat. And even if they were, why would it persist for so long and be so um, like it changes the sky so much.
Yeah.
We're dealing with, and if you really watch the sky, what you'll see is once the lines unravel into a haze, then they'll turn on ground-based stations where they use intersecting radio waves to zap the sky, and then it'll ripple, and the clouds will change even more. So something's happening there, and how can that be explained through atmospheric conditions?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen rippling before just within the clouds themselves. And I'll use the weather to, well, I'll use the clouds. And normally when you see that kind of fish scaling within clouds, you can pretty much guarantee that within the next 48 hours, you're most likely going to receive rain in that area. Now, to say that the contrails, which can come out of a jet, will just dissipate, if we applied that to clouds, I've sat there and watched clouds melt away with the heat of the sun, absolutely. But surely under some circumstances, these contrails could actually form clouds or scaling based upon the fact that a natural formation of a cloud is formed from water vapor itself.
Well, surely it could assist in the formation, but not into a milky white haze that persists for the entire day and then is reactive. Sometimes you'll even see them filling in the gaps, and it's all about observation, really, to completely wake up. Like, people can watch my documentary and do as much research as they want, but it's seeing it with your own eyes is really their aha moment, where planes that shouldn't be in each other's wake
Yeah,
are side by side, look like they're mixing chemicals, or where there's a spot missed and another plane will do a U-turn to hit that spot to fill in the gaps. You know, Persisting for time. Like, I see what you're saying. Like,
yeah,
can clouds be made through the nuclei kind of condensing from the heat from the planes, and not big fluffy clouds. The hazes that are created, I would imagine, are only from something being administered and not from just heat in the sky,
yeah.
coming out of the jets.
That's it. I mean, I'm not denying that this exists because I know it exists. I know for a fact that there are things being sprayed in the sky, and I'm well aware of the geoengineering that goes on. I've seen so much evidence to back this up. But I think the main core of what kind of gripes me with a lot of people that I talk to is that they want to point at every line in the sky and tell me it's a chemtrail. And I don't believe that everything in the sky is a chemtrail.
Mm. Well, I mean, that's accurate. Not every single line is a chemtrail, but the ones that persist, I would say, are not just water vapor.
Yeah. Is weather modification and cloud seeding a weapon, or is it for actual practical uses?
Both. Definitely the answer is both. There's the HAMP, Hurricane Atmospheric Modification Program, where drones administered black carbon soot into approaching hurricanes to experiment on whether they could quell or intensify them. This started with Hurricane Katrina, where Katrina was intensified, and the powers that be could quell a hurricane if they wanted through um, well, they would use, like, they can precipitate lightning with lasers and precipitate rain with lasers, very well documented and patented. And so through techniques such as lasers, or even like using like a bomb kind of thing in a hurricane, you could quell a hurricane easily if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Like, the powers that be could quell hurricanes, but instead they're steered and intensified, and sometimes they even slow them down over cities and whatnot. Also, making it rain over forest fires, that would be a great thing to be
Yeah.
discussed, or drought-stricken regions. The idea of rain making cloud seeding, it was kind of swept under the rug in the 70s and 80s. It was commonplace in the 60s and early 70s. And I've got newspaper clippings of farmers that would even seed clouds coming over their farms with nutrients and have it rain down whatever they need, potassium, phosphorus, or whatever your nitrogen,
Yeah.
potassium, whatever your plants need.
Yeah.
So that's it was common knowledge that you could seed clouds, make rain, but now it's not. It's becoming now reintroduced and normalized through the Dubai floods and different news media campaigns. Probably because weather by design is going to be coming back up through solar geoengineering and the dimming of the sun to save us from global warming and all of that. So it can be used for good purposes, but it seems like it's weaponized, and flooding and drought and hurricanes and even tornadoes and all these things are created for what problem, reaction, solution, nefarious purposes to
Yeah.
corner humanity and have them think that we need a solution to all this, which is, the solution to climate change and global warming are they're all pretty negative. Climate lockdowns, uh, net zero green initiatives, ULEZ, if you know about the ULEZ in London and Scotland and all that. And all this is just taking away people's freedoms.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you got to scratch your head and wonder what's really going on. And then, of course, solar geoengineering, dimming the sun with aerosols to save us from a problem that doesn't even exist.
Oh yeah. I've been watching it all. I see it all going on. I actually see the boys in England actually cutting the ULEZ cameras down, which we wouldn't encourage, but it certainly doesn't cause any harm to humanity. So now, one of the things I'd like to discuss is something I've followed for a lot of years now. I've read books on it and studied it, and it's a site up in Alaska. So let's discuss HAARP, HAARP, what it is and what it's used for.
So HARP is an acronym. It stands for the Highly Active Auroral Research Program, I believe,
Yeah.
and it's a large field of antennas that measure about 50 feet tall, and basically it's like this: you put food in the microwave, and you turn on your microwave, and you've got intersecting radio waves. They're micro-sized radio waves that intersect at the focal point, which is your food. And the intersection of the microwaves creates an oscillation of water, and it heats up the water in your food, heating up your food. Well, what HARP does is this football field size um, array of antennas. It can pick a focal point in the atmosphere. And I mean, the focal point in the atmosphere can be miles long, but either way, it heats a point in the atmosphere. So if you back up to when we used to watch television and watch the weather is determined by these H's and L's, right? This high and low pressure. You've got rising air and sinking air. And the military industrial complex, the scientific community, whoever's behind all of HARP, determined that they could make those H's. They could create high pressure.
Yeah.
So they pick a focal point in the atmosphere and use these antennas, direct these antennas, and create heat in the atmosphere, and then the air below will rise, and you can create a wall of high pressure, and then that can steer jet streams, and clashing in H's and L's will make thunderstorms or tornadoes or hurricanes and whatnot. And utilizing chemtrails with the HARP, you put some metallics in the microwave, you get a lot of crazy heat. It really intensifies things when you put metal in the microwave. Just like this, if you administer aerosols in the atmosphere and then zap them with HARP, you can engineer the weather, control the world, right? And so HARP was the first of these ionospheric heaters, but now that technology has been shrunk down into what I believe is NexRad and Doppler. These giant golf ball looking things are on mountain sides, and they're all over the world now. And they claim to be predicting the weather, which is irony because they're actually controlling the weather, and it's so easy to predict it when you control it.
Yeah, I've seen those things they look like oil tankers floating out into the ocean. I've seen them
Yeah,
on.
some are mobile as well.
Yeah. So, that's quite disturbing. Now, the location of HARP is in Alaska, and a lot of people don't realize until they study a map properly how close Alaska actually is to Russia. Do you think this was a strategic location as a deterrent for any possible attacks? Or is it there as a warning and a weapon to be used possibly in the future against anything that may move forward against Russia? And we're pretty much there at this moment in time, to be honest.
Well, I've never thought about it as a weapon deterrent, but surely it could be used likely to shoot down missiles and whatnot too. It's a directed energy weapon if you think about it. And yeah, that's interesting. I know that in the 70s there was the woodpecker, right? And
Yeah,
that was from Russia, and they were using ELF, extremely low frequency waves, and those were actually hitting the US, and Russia was targeting the US with extremely low frequencies. And there's a neighboring town where I live in Medford, Oregon, where the suicide rate went through the roof because people were being impacted so severely by it. So likely it was a response to, or likely motivated to be near Russia, so that in an instance where we were in a war with Russia, and that it's all quiet war, and if they're using the woodpecker on us, we're probably using the harp on them. And um, it's a great location because it can do a lot from where it's at. I think they engineer the weather and prevent certain countries from getting rain, and keep things in
yeah,
check in their own way. And likely there's jet streams that they can manipulate from there and what have you as well.
yeah. You mentioned their direct energy weapons, and we've seen fires in the likes of Hawaii and places like that recently that have been questioned by a lot of people out there. Now, one of the things that I'm aware of that has been developed as a weapon and a direct energy weapon is millimeter wave technology. Now, this was developed to attack people, cause massive pain in the body, and even to the point where the military, when they were in the likes of Desert Storm and battles over in the Middle East, were actually using this millimeter wave technology to put suggestions and thoughts into the mind of the enemy. And there was at one point where they used this millimeter wave technology to project into the minds that Allah was telling the opposition soldiers to put down their weapons, surrender, and move forward to the troops. They actually did that. And this is testament to the power of this millimeter wave technology. Now, as technology has moved on and it comes into the public domain, people don't realize that this millimeter technology that was being used back then to impact people, dispel crowds, cause pain, and change the voices in people's heads is actually 5G. And that is now a huge network of 5G through the world. And that 5G network, and I noticed it, and many people around the world noticed it, even during the pandemic, where everyone was locked down, the engineers were out there frantically putting up as many 5G towers as possible. What do you think that the 5G goal is, what it's really for? Because I don't believe for one moment that this is beneficial for cell phone technology and people moving forward, having faster Wi-Fi. I've got a feeling that there's a far more nefarious use for this. What do you see its use for? Is it anything to do with what we're discussing in regards to weather modification, or is it far more sinister?
Both, and I'm glad you brought up the topic. Yes, the active denial system for the insurgents in Afghanistan and Iraq, it was designed for the millimeter wave to create a frequency fence and have it burn the skin of people trying to come into a certain zone. Because the millimeter wave, the width of a penny is a millimeter. It's very absorptive. It absorbs into everything it hits. And so if you really take a step back, this is weaponized technology. If it's so absorptive, it shouldn't be on our doorstep or outside of our bedroom window or in our neighborhoods. We should have carrier waves that are not absorptive to carry our data on, because otherwise it's hitting people and it's going to impact their health. Long story short, why is 5G being ramped up and rolled out? It's you got to go back to that evil boardroom of evil trillionaires, and maybe they're not even all human, but they want to introduce a transhumanism dystopian society. But how can you get from A to Z? Well, first you have to dismantle the reproduction of humanity. And I think it's an attack on reproductive organs. Once the millimeter carrier wave is fully launched and deployed, and you've got small cells on every street corner, and all the 5G phones are repeaters of this carrier wave, the 5G technology is nothing like its predecessor. It's repeating the signal of everything around you. It's not connecting to the cell tower like the 4G would. Your phone is actually acting as a small cell. Okay, it's repeating everything that's surrounding it, and it's exponentially more radiation than before. Once the millimeter wave is completely released, children that are conceived, born, and raised in this environment, I believe once they become of age, they won't be able to procreate. And then finally, the New World Order agenda will rear its ugly head and push this transhumanism agenda to live forever, to save humanity, where you'll have a transfer of consciousness, digitization of consciousness, which is total nonsense. It's an abomination because we have souls, we're spiritual beings. Death shouldn't be so scary, but they want people transferring consciousness into these cyborg clone versions of self, because if you can't reproduce, you'll be able to be tricked into this dystopia. How does it relate to chemtrails? Well, if you've got antenna everywhere, they can elevate the metallics in the air. One thing that I think is problematic with the powers that be is they spray these aerosols in the sky, and once they get to the ground level, they're not just hovering in our airspace, they'll come and hit the ground. But if you can electrify them and keep the air saturated, then the air becomes more conductive, and they can have their 5G wave only goes about 500 feet. It absorbs into everything it hits. It absorbs into trees. That's why they're cutting down so many trees. It absorbs into even water droplets and leaves. It's not efficient for a carrier wave for technology, but if you can have the air electrified and suspend these nanoparticles and make everything more conductive, then you've got this Internet of Things where you've got self-driving cars and automated this and that, and transhumanism, singularity, and all these really ugly, weird things, Agenda 2030, 2050, which I think is well on its way. If you watch the movie Handmaid's Tale or Children of Men, you can kind of wrap your head around where they're going with that. But it's order out of chaos. When the majority of people are unable to reproduce, it'll be this massive problem, reaction, solution, Hegelian dialectic, where people are forced into a new paradigm, which will be likely, Elon Musk's Neuralink type reality, where people are thinking that they have to prolong their lives because there is no humanity after them because they can't reproduce. I saw the writing on the wall, and I created my own EMF protection clothing line where I make silver clothing for pregnant women and all that sort of stuff. Please take a look at that. It's Sparrow Gear, SPERO gear.com. I'm happy to have that thriving. And the word sparrow means, in Latin, it means hope, because the goal is to bring hope and education awareness to the future generations so that they don't have to face this dystopian reality. So hopefully some humans will still be able to reproduce, and there will still be humanity left. Also, with all of the antennas, the weather can be steered around more by being able to create those high pressure systems from the ground, with these electrifications of the nanoparticulates and whatnot, with these antenna everywhere. So I think that plays a role in it as well.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned The Handmaid's Tale, because one thing that stood out to me when I watched that was the fact that the bad people and the state that they were in were known as Gilead. Now, what people need to do is go online and take a look at what Gilead Sciences is, because Gilead Sciences is a research-based biopharmaceutical company focused on the discovery and development of things moving forward to the very transhumanism that you were talking about right now. And, again, with that transhumanism, it becomes a soul trap. It means people that die and the spirit needs to go back to where it come from. It's a soul trap. It's going to stop people returning back from human form to exactly what they were originally as an energy. And that is, something very scary. What you did mention there that kind of triggered something within me is the fact that you mentioned during the war they were using the 5G as a barrier around them. And when people approached that barrier, it burnt the skin. Wouldn't this be the ideal invisible prison to put around 15-minute cities to stop people leaving and trying to get freedom away from the very system that these agendas are now pushing?
Very much so, or just keep them, even to keep them in their homes via their smart meters and their small cell outside of their house. When the climate change, if and when the climate change lockdowns happen, or if you've just been a baddie and you're not good on your social credit system, they can lock you in your house with this technology. Just to back up, you were mentioning the voice to skull technology and 5G and how that all incorporates with chemtrails. This would also make me think of Operation or Project Bluebeam.
Yes.
And so Bluebeam is creating a holographic screen in the sky with different chemtrails. So people do rainwater analysis when there's a weird day with a lot of persistent lines in the sky and people are questioning what's going on. And it doesn't always rain afterwards, but when it does, oftentimes scientists or activists will test their rainwater. And a very strange constituent has been coming up in Canada rainwaters called terbium, which is a very expensive rare earth element, rare earth mineral that should not be in the sky at all.
Yeah.
And it is used in 3D televisions and projectors to create a screen. So the idea with Project Bluebeam is the military could create a screen in the sky and then make a hologram, and then Allah could come in the sky as a visual, and then you could also use the voice to skull and use it in military, right? Well, there's also other things that they can utilize or do with that technology, such as a fake alien invasion or even an asteroid hitting the Earth. So if you were in your evil think tank boardroom and you wanted to dismantle the spiritual evolution of humanity and you're monitoring it and making sure it's on track for transhumanism and not empowerment and whatnot, because the reason why we're under attack on so many levels, from the fluoride in the water to our foods to even our light bulbs, all these different means of attack, it's because we're very powerful spiritual beings. And the day that we realize it, it's game over for the elite, for the technocratic globalists or whatever you want to call them. And
Yeah.
they're terrified of us. They are completely terrified of our rising potential. So they keep us quelled, they keep us low vibrationally. But if we start to elevate to a degree that they're, pulling out all the stops, they might do something like an alien invasion where they use their hologram to make people think and their voice to skull technology. But all that is first, they need that 5G infrastructure to be deployed so that they can do that.
Yeah. And if anyone watching thinks that we've both lost the plot, go onto the World Economic Forum website or go onto the United Nations website. These agendas are laid out very clearly, exactly what their goals are and what they intend to do. And that is moving forward in lockstep. Every single day, I'm seeing things that are proving that they are continuing this agenda. With Project Bluebeam, the one thing that I always considered may happen, and it would be a big thing for a global thing, is for them to use something like that as the second coming of Christ, to have people believe the prophecies of the Bible and bow down to whatever is told to them after that. And that has always been a major concern of mine, because we still do have a lot of people around the world that follow religion to a level that they have put all their faith into the second coming of Christ as the savior. And my concern is that the savior may not actually be what you believe it to be. It may be an absolute hoax by using the likes of Project Bluebeam in order to not only convert millions of people around the world to this belief system, but also the existing core of believers, and dupe them in such a massive way and have them follow orders that really aren't coming from the source itself.
Indeed, yes. If you look into the New World Order, like main agenda, it's one world government, one world religion. How are they going to get from where we're at to there? It seems like a catalyst like that would play very well in that game that they're trying to play.
Yeah, we're definitely getting this video banned on YouTube, you know. Let's go back to HARP. Now, we recently had X-class solar flaring. I think there was about 7 X-class flares that came off that were Earth directed. And this gave people down as far as Florida the opportunity to see the aurora borealis from this. At the very same time, we were aware that HARP in Alaska was actually activated. Would you say that this was coincidental, or did it have a purpose?
So that was very interesting. Where I live, which is basically Northern California, I live in Oregon, which is the next state up, but I'm on the California border, and we never see the Northern Lights, the aurora borealis. And where I live, everyone was in a big fuss because they were so excited that they got to see it.
Yeah,
Now, come to find out, everyone was saying, I saw it on my phone." They didn't see it with their own eyes. So that's one thing that I'd like to talk about. But also, I believe that the HARP campaign, so I think that solar flares is another play here. And the more that the media latches onto things, the more that I question it. I think that the solar flare game will intensify into the point where it'll knock out some power or electricity or the internet for a little bit of time. And then people will be dying to get back on their social media. And when they do, they'll be told, well, the solar flares are getting so intense that we're going to create a layer of aerosols in between, metallic aerosols. You know, we've realized that aluminum is the best thing that'll help block these solar flares. And
yeah,
now you're welcome. We've got the solution, back to the problem reaction solution. And everyone will be bowing down and praising the chemtrails because it'll keep them on their social media and their TikTok and allow them to continue on as normal.
yeah,
That's a very daunting, slippery slope that I don't want to be reality. But also at the same time, how are people looking at things on their phone that they can't see with their own visual eyes? People say, oh no, the optics on my phone. Okay, first off, Samsung has its past 6 phone models where they don't disclose this to the people, but if you go to take a photo of the moon, no matter
yeah,
whether you're zoomed out or zoomed in, wherever you are looking at the moon, it'll search the internet with its AI and
yeah,
it'll give you a digital image of someone else's astrophotography from a telescope, you know, or a NASA image that
yeah,
could be computer composite, and it'll show you this is the photo that you took. People are none the wiser, and they're trusting their phones more than they trust their own eyes. When you zoom in using your camera and it gives you a photo that's not your own, that's slippery slope in my eyes where people are trusting their phone over their own eyes. Now, if people were seeing the northern lights only on their camera, I mean, if you know the filters that go on these things now, there's beauty app filters. You can take a picture of a crocodile and give it a haircut and make it look like a fashion model. I mean, there's AI to back up. There's AI celebrities. There's Victoria's Secret models. There are rich models on Instagram that are not real, that are just AI, that you can pay to model your clothing, and they've never taken a breath of fresh air in their entire life, and they don't have any blood in their veins or anything like that. This is just all AI generated. So
yeah,
we're entering into a dystopia where our intuition is so important. Our gut instinct is so important because our connection to our self and our souls and our intuition, our gut is going to be a lot. Is going to be the only thing we have really when everyone's thinking that something on their phone is real when they can't see it with their own eyes. I believe that HARP likely created a light show. I mean, it's called the Highly Active Auroral Research Program, and it's in Alaska in the north, creating northern lights. I firmly believe that the solar flare, maybe there were some aurora borealis, maybe there were some, but not in Australia, okay?
yeah,
Not in Florida. And the people that did see it outside most likely were seeing something induced by HARP. And the people that saw it only on their phone, well, they were seeing it only on their phone. They're not seeing anything in real life. Like there's a game called Pokemon Go, and people chase around Pokemon that aren't real. Those things aren't real in real life. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is mind control, slippery slope, brainwashing, where people think now that if you see it on your phone, it's real. And if you don't see it in real life, it's okay because on your phone, it's, it takes the place of your God given senses. So I think that it's the beginning of a new narrative where people are beginning to think, well, solar flares can impact me anywhere on Earth, even though the Northern Lights was only visible from the north before, but because the intensification. And I watch some mainstream kind of media and news, and there's it claims to be like a truther channel called the Epoch Times, EPOCH Times, but it's still just mainstream, okay? And they were talking about how horrible the solar flares were and that they almost knocked out the energy grid, but there's all these devices that grounded the energy on Earth, and the next one, if they're any more intense, it could knock out the energy grid on Earth and whatever. What better way to convince humanity that, or what better way to demonize the sun? Because there's been a propaganda campaign to demonize the sun for quite some time, and it hasn't been enough for people to really back up solar geoengineering, solar radiation management, whatever you want to call it. There's so many different synonyms for it. It's mind-boggling. But I think it's a tactic to normalize and introduce chemtrails to the world and tell them that it's beneficial, and then everyone will be loving it and not listening to a word I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, is there a possibility that we can have an X-class solar flare, maybe an X10, like what happened in 1859 with the Carrington event that hit Canada? And is the possibility of this kill shot that could actually come and cause absolute destruction to the very fragile electrical systems that we rely on every day?
Is there a chance that there's a real this and that? There's always a chance, but I wasn't around in 1859, so I can't corroborate that story. And as we all know, his story, the history that we're told, is oftentimes fabricated. So if I mean, I'd like to meet someone in person that witnessed that event, and then we could go from there. I mean, if you really look at NASA and the lies that they spit and spell, and I don't think that we're due for, I mean, there's all this stuff, the grand solar minimum and all these sort of things that I don't buy. And it comes down to just gut instinct. And, some things you can't necessarily prove because there's so much disinformation, misinformation out there. Could there be an X10 solar flare well on its way? Well, quite possibly, but would the media be shoving it down our throats, and then all of a sudden they're going to have this perfect solution, which is chemtrails? At the end of the day, when you line up all the dots, it seems like a government psyop if you really look at it the right way. You know what I mean? It's just like 9/11, like one thing after another, that they found the passports, and then there's this, and then there's that, and then the plane evaporates into the building and doesn't leave any traces. And after you've added it all up, it was an inside job, definitely inside job, but you have to get all the puzzle pieces aligned and do the math. And at the end of the day, you can't deny the facts.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with that, we see a lot of infighting from groups of people that think they have the exact reason as to why, Project Bluebeam, possibly for the generation of the aircraft. And I have seen the videos where these things just literally disappear. And then we have the explosives and the talk of nanothermite and many other things that went on. And I listened to a lot of stories of people that, were there. They talked about what went on. And everybody has their own theory as to what it is. And sometimes I look at these theories and I say it was all of it together. They needed the explosives, they needed the demolition, they needed the blue beam technology to be able to make it look like these aircraft hit. And it seems to me that it was a combination of everything that everyone is arguing about in regards to the theory behind what brought this down. But I think regardless of what side people take onto that, I think the undeniable fact that there was a lot of people involved with this, and it was not, as the 9/11 Commission report put out in their publication. And yeah, it was for a purpose. It was for a purpose to further an agenda, and it served a lot of purposes. Larry Silverstein, obviously reinsuring the buildings for twice the value, the asbestos problems with them, the need to bring out the Patriot Act, the need to move forward with wars, with what General Wesley Clark came out and said about the wars in 7 countries following these attacks. This was all part of an incredible agenda to move things forward, to strip the freedoms and liberties of the people around the world, and is very likely still part and parcel of where we are today, moving forward with the agendas that they have as well. So, people who sit back and still believe the official 9/11 narrative from the very people that were involved in this and profited from this should maybe take another look at that. We've interviewed Dan Hanley from 9/11 Pilots from Truth, and what they actually did to him. If the people go back and look at this episode on that interview, what the people did to him, you won't believe. They locked this guy up in a psychiatric hospital to try and shut him up. Only that friends and family got him out. So that's a real bigger story. And do you know what? Me and you could do a whole episode on that one day, I'm sure. But let's move on with climate change. Now, I know my view on climate change is not in line with what most people think, but we appear to be getting told a lot of lies in regards to this. And I'm sure that you'd agree with that. If they are saying that they're spraying for the purpose of geoengineering for the climate changes, and we know that's absolute bullshit, what is the real purpose for spraying?
Well, it's multifaceted. It seems like that they are creating the problem. So where I live, we've had about 10 heat waves this year. Each and every one of them have involved an irregular uptick in air traffic, gridding the skies. Then the sky seems to be zapped with that fish scale HARP technology and a blanket of this haze, which seems to be metallics. It comes in, and then day after day, we end up in this haze where the heat can't go out at night, and we end up with a heat wave. And then that heat wave hits the newspaper saying global warming is here and we have a problem. So it seems, and then also you've got geoengineered drought situations where we have crazy forest fires and whatnot, and then no one says anything about seeding the clouds and making it rain over these forest fires. So we've got fires and we've got intensified hurricanes that are steered towards cities, and then we've got flooding and all these things under the realm of climate change to hit the mainstream media to tell us that we've got such a big problem that we need a solution. Slowly they'll say we've got maybe a solution, we're experimenting with this, and we think maybe we can dim the sun, but they won't tell you they're already doing it, right? Well, between Al Gore, Greta, and the control media, people have, in a space of fear, mind you, they think that we're in dire straits, that sea levels are rising drastically, and that island nations are all doomed, and that India and New York, Manhattan will be underwater soon. And these predictions never happened. I watched a documentary, which is great, by just PBS, which is like a public service over here in the States, called Sand Wars. Sand Wars dives into the fact that sand is a commodity and that there's a sand mafia that will go and steal barges and barges of sand from islands, intensifying erosion. So erosion is a thing that can be intensified through the theft of sand that's used in construction of concrete. You can't use desert sand for construction and concrete. So in Dubai, where they're building these islands and using concrete to build skyscrapers, and all over the world they're still building, and they need sand. A lot of it comes from stolen sand from beach fronts that then lead to further erosion. But if you really look into it, which is not that hard, look at a photo of Sydney, Australia, or the photo of the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
The sea levels have not risen at all. You know,
No.
you can get photos of a storm, and then during the storm, the level's a little higher, or high tide or whatever, but sea levels aren't rising. And this drastic need for an action or reaction to global warming, aka climate change, it doesn't exist. But they want us to think, and they want to paint this picture, which is, it's easy when you can control the weather and make people think that they're in a dire situation. But at the end of the day, the purpose of geoengineering primarily is to convince the world that they need it.
Yeah.
So they geoengineer the weather, and then people's reaction is fear, problem, reaction, solution, where the reaction is fear. The problem created is this climate change. And the solution, which is yet to be completely told to us, but they are like through the cracks saying, oh, we have a potential solution. And then in Alameda, California, they did this cloud whitening experiment that was hush, and then because they didn't want to have any protests, and that was on April 3rd of this year. But it's been leaked through the New York Times. They have a potential solution, that they're making fake clouds now off of an aircraft carrier and what have you. There was supposed to be a sun dimming experiment in Arizona in 2018 through Bill Gates, using different variable sizes of aluminum. And we had a protest, me and other activists, and we had a conference. We had a protest on Mother's Day for Mother Earth. We had a huge conference. We packed this conference hall, and the entire city of Tucson, Arizona came to find out that Bill Gates wanted to do an experiment of dimming the sun. Not everyone recognized the fact that chemtrails are ongoing, but environmentalist groups came out and they put a stop to this experiment from happening. So people don't want this idea to happen until they're forced into it. But if something like, you know, a solar flare or whatever really pushed people into it, they'd be lining up for it, it seems.
Yeah. Al Gore, the very man that made millions out of his documentary, The Inconvenient Truth, and then went and spent the money on beachfront properties around the world for himself. That alone speaks volumes to exactly how much he believed his own BS at that point. Let's get on to the global warming agenda we were speaking about just then. They say the problem is our carbon emissions, hence the taxation which people are being subjected to. Yet the geoengineering experiment is for blocking the sun. Would that not attribute to the fact that the sun itself is part of a natural cycle of periods of heating and cooling? And wouldn't history prove this as well?
Right, exactly. The sun creates the entire hydrological system that dictates where we live. Plants thrive on carbon, and the sunshine makes the plants grow. By dimming the sun, you'd be effectively making carbon go up, right? Because you'd be preventing the whole system, from the ecological system and the plant growth system, from actually working.
Yeah.
And so this pointing the finger at carbon and saying carbon is the problem. I've worked in farms where greenhouses actually blast carbon into the greenhouse purposefully to make the plants grow. Carbon is not the problem, and actually the number one greenhouse gas is water vapor. The Like water vapor, like cloud creation, will cause a greenhouse effect, and carbon is not the problem at all. One thing to mention about Al Gore's movie is it has become commonplace and even used in schools as part of the curriculum. Okay, so children are being completely brainwashed into thinking that this film is fact, right? When, even though none of his predictions came true. And so a parent in Kent, UK, had to take it to the Supreme Court and got it removed from the school system, at least in his jurisdiction, because the Supreme Court had to dig into it and realize that nothing, that it was complete hogwash. And they said it was I forget the exact verbiage, but they said his movie is just fear mongering. It's not true, and it shouldn't be used in the school system. And so it was able to actually get it pulled out of the curriculum through the courts, which is spectacular.
Now, toxic lithium is being sprayed. It was monitored over Oregon back in 2015. and other areas also. But isn't lithium a drug used to cause psychological change in people or dumb them down, as well as being highly flammable?
So Anne Fillmore was a researcher who was monitoring plumes of moisture or haze coming off of the ocean. And in her research, she showed that high levels of lithium were coming off of the ocean, where it looked like it was chemtrails being sprayed, and then the sky would be really pink as well. And she came to the conclusion that it was coming from um, the aerosols. And lithium is highly toxic and very manipulative of the mind, yes, and is administered to calm people down and whatnot, and can wreak havoc on the brain. Also worth mentioning, so there's all these different constituents in the sprays, and it's left to people to analyze their air and rain and soil to get to the bottom of what's going on. Come to find out, manganese is also a constituent that is being sprayed, and it makes people very aggravated and can make people just erupt into violence. People that work near manganese mines are prone. There's like um, statistically significant upticks in violence in those areas. And the African American activist Dick Gregory, I believe he lost his life for speaking out against this. He's recently passed away, but he spoke out against the low flying aircraft would come over the low income areas in New York City where he lived, spraying aerosols, which he believed were manganese, and then all of a sudden everyone would be fighting. And then come to find out, likely mad cow disease was not a disease at all, but it was actually just manganese being sprayed from the aerosols as well.
That's unbelievable. I mean, when you think about it, and I look at the world going on around us right now, the powers that be that have these agendas in place would love nothing more than to create massive civil unrest. I'm waiting for the US elections to happen because I think people aren't going to be very happy with the results, whichever side of the fence they're on. Something like that could be used at that point in time to create massive civil unrest. And of course, those who have police and military at their beck and call know how to deal with violence. What a perfect opportunity to create either martial law or further lockdowns using something like that.
Definitely, it seems like the next election is everyone thinks it's going to be fraudulent regardless, and the American public has become so agitated where they're only voting out of hatred. Either they're voting because they hate Biden or they're voting because they hate Trump.
Yeah.
And with all that hatred spewing, and we've got the turn up in the frequencies and all of the small cells being put up everywhere, and the aerosols have become normalized. It looks like the perfect recipe for that. There's also a documentary called 2000 Mules, and it went viral on Amazon. And whenever anything goes viral on Amazon, I start to question it. It put into the consciousness that the last election was fraudulent, that Trump should have won, and that Biden, and everyone thinks that Biden is a pedo, and it's just staggering the amount of hatred that's brewing in this country right now. I would imagine that likely there will be some very obvious election fraud, like Texas will go vote Biden or something. And I've even heard that if California says if the nation votes, so there's different states that are claiming that if the nation votes Trump as president, that they won't acknowledge Trump as president and that they won't accept his nomination because he's such a horrible person. This is all by design.
Yeah.
I want to back up. So before we were talking about chemtrails, and your questions were great about this how the engines interact with the moisture in the air and whether it can be persistent and how do we know and all this sort of stuff. I think it's really important for people to keep an eye on their sky. What I've witnessed is when there is a clear blue day, that's the beginning. Okay, so if you're like making a soup, you start with your base, or if you're going to do a beautiful Michelangelo kind of painting on canvas, you take that canvas and you first paint it white, or you give it its base. With the chemtrails, if they want to get to the point where they're completely saturating the sky, they start with the clear sky. They wait for all the chemicals to be out of the sky. Otherwise, they'd be mixing stuff with the residue that's left over, and it wouldn't work as well for them in their whole projects. So when you've got a beautiful blue sky, and this is actually nice because as an activist, it's kind of in the space of fear when you're trying to point out to your friend, family, and peer, look at those lines in the sky, look at those lines. Point out those beautiful blue skies, those white fluffy clouds, and realize how abnormal they are, and bring those up to your friends and your people. But then also, when there are those blue skies, when the planes are flying back and forth with nothing coming out of the back, or just a little contrail, those are the days to notice, because they've got their clear canvas, and soon they will be coming out and doing something completely different. And I've noticed they will start to prime the sky with planes that are emitting shorter trails or medium long trails, that they don't come out first and do their long trails on those days. So you can actually time it and watch it. And I've even been able to say to my friends, well, because I've seen all these short trail planes today zigzagging all over the place, I think they're priming the sky with barium. I can tell them tomorrow there'll be lines in the sky. And they're like, how could you possibly know that? And I've been able to predict it and nail it. It's nice and easy if the weather forecast says it's going to be really much more hot the next day and partly cloudy, right? The temperature is going to go up 30 degrees Fahrenheit and it's partly cloudy. And today it's a blue, fluffy cloud day. To me, it's pretty clear what's going to happen. But I've been able to predict it. But you don't have to predict it to your friends and peers. You can just predict it for yourself. Watch the sky and watch how the sky changes. And for that, you don't need any research or books or documentaries. You can witness things firsthand, and there you've witnessed something, and you have your own personal moment. And in that, you can come to conclusions on your own because you have your hypothesis. You test it time and time again, and you can see what's going on. Also, the uptick in air traffic. I mean, if you live out in the country and you see one plane every day, but then on the edge of a storm, you've got 20 planes showing up and they're doing something abnormal, zigzagging, filling in the gaps and doing loop-de-loops and whatnot. You don't need a podcast host or scientist or documentary or anything telling you how to think or feel. You can witness this on your own, where you're at in your own backyard. I just want to say that.
Yeah, no problem. Back to 5G. Any of the metals that are being put into the atmosphere, has anybody made a reactive connection with 5G or tested anything with 5G to show that these metals are reactive to these millimeter frequency waves?
Well, you stick a piece of aluminum foil in the microwave and look and see what happens. Has anybody that I know done any aerosol testing with metallics and 5G? I've yet to witness it, no. But I mean, you've got a micro-sized carrier wave that absorbs into everything it hits. It's going to absorb into the metals that you administer to, and metals and frequency, we know, and microwave frequencies, we know how they engage. So it doesn't take a genius, in my opinion.
Yeah, we mentioned 9/11 before, and I spoke to you earlier about something that happened with Sandy Hook as well. Can chemtrails be something being used to block satellite imagery deliberately? And have we ever seen any evidence of these linked to events like false flags, the likes of 9/11? Has anybody actually gone in and mapped what the skies were doing via satellite imagery on those particular days?
Great question. Well, firstly, whenever there's an astrological event, like a couple of days ago, there was all these planets were aligning in the sky, and where I live, they pulled out all the stops to create a cloud haze, a cloud cover, so that we couldn't witness that, or maybe so that we couldn't get, you know, downloads from the universe or whatever it may be. But on my Facebook group, or on my Facebook page, I put it out there, and every single person was sending me photos of their sky that day. All around the world, the sky was blanketed with chemtrails, and they couldn't see the sky that day. So I find that very curious. Also, during the aurora borealis and even the eclipse as well, people witnessed that their cloud cover was administered synthetically,
Yeah.
and they couldn't see. during Sandy Hook, we were mentioning that the school was covered so that you couldn't see what was actually going on. And I think that it's military practice that you could easily do that over. So, say you're worried about getting bombed, and you've got some nukes or some camp or something, or you've got a military arsenal, and you're worried about your enemy being able to see you from satellite. That's the perfect tool. You create a cloud cover of, a dense cloud cover of metallic aerosols, and then they can't get satellite readings. So that's something. But I definitely think that that's a tool, and surely utilized in various aspects in military projects.
Yeah. Now, these chemical blends for spraying have to be firstly manufactured. And, have you been able to identify any businesses that make these products?
Yes, I have. Off the top of my head, I can't. I had a researcher contact me. I've hosted a bunch of different conferences, and so at one I had a speaker, and he had followed the money, and the U.S. Department of Energy is fully involved, and so this is dirty energy. So you've got coal burning power plants and oil, dirty oil. So you've got dirty energy who is being blamed for global warming. Okay, and they are actually the ones that are behind the scenes creating the technology for chemtrails, because when the world finally points the finger at them and says global warming is real, it's your fault,
Yeah.
then the solution will be in their pocket. They'll be controlling the solution, which is to dim the sun with solar geoengineering. So
Yeah.
that's something. So people that have come to my conference and spoke, they have followed the money of where the coal fly ash goes. So you've got coal burning power plants all over the world. Okay. And instead of them emitting this black, disgusting gook into the sky, they have filters in their smokestacks. So, and this is by law. And the filters filter the nanoparticulate metallics and all the stuff from burning the coal. And then they're rinsed, and this sludge is put in bladders and buried underground. You're supposed to dispose of this disgusting burned coal byproduct. But instead, it's put on rail trains and taken directly to Air Force bases. I've had multiple people follow the money, and there's companies that will buy the coal fly ash and sell it to the Air Force bases, and it goes directly from A to Z or B, whatever you want to call it. And what makes perfect sense is these nanoparticulate aluminum, barium, cadmium, nickel, you name it, manganese, lithium, all this stuff is in coal, and you burn it, and then it should be disposed of. But instead, it can go to the Air Force, and then they can filter it through with their processes, likely using magnetization of certain means, and then they pull off their certain chemicals that they want to mix in the sky, and then they'll even charge them a certain way. So you've got your aluminum, you charge it one way; your barium, you charge it another way. You put it in the sky, and they're charged differently, so they can bond to each other, and then you zap them with the electromagnetic frequencies to excite them even more, to get them to stick in the sky even longer. And that's how you see them sticking in the sky as long as they do. But the show that was put on last night over my town, the persistent chemtrails or contrails, whatever you want to call them, they lasted for hours and unraveled into this spider web of, it was just so elaborate, and I've never seen anything like it. And that's another thing, like, how, if these were just condensation trails, how come they're acting so funny now and acting up to the degree that they are, and then making all these crazy globular shapes and making little circle holes in the sky? And why did the different powers that be have to come out with 12 new cloud names? Like, new cloud names were introduced. So I was making my film Frankenskies, and all these things started getting in the way of me releasing it. And I was like shaking my head at the sky, like, why, God, I got to get this movie out. And then the media introduced solar geoengineering as a potential. in the mainstream. And then they demonized chemtrail believers in the mainstream. And then they came up with 12 new cloud types out of the mainstream media narrative. These clouds didn't exist before. Each and every one of them is a variation of chemtrail aerosol spraying and um, in its life. Like it's like the life of a chemtrail. It lasts maybe for who knows, like a few hours, 6 hours, a whole day sometimes. And through the process, it looks differently. Each one is being labeled a new cloud type to normalize it. And they even gave them stamps in the US. So each chemtrail new cloud got a stamp name. But why would they have to come out with new clouds if they didn't even exist before? It's because they didn't exist before. And why? It's because of this new technologies being introduced.
Yeah, what you mentioned there about the coal and the fact that they take this chemical composition and use it when really it should be getting removed and discarded reminds me very much of the whole system of aluminium smelting, of where the byproduct and the poisonous byproduct of aluminium smelting, or aluminum as you as everyone in the US calls it, is fluoride. And all of a sudden, the governments around the world came up with this great idea that we should put fluoride into the public water systems in order to strengthen people's teeth and stop them getting cavities. It's the most ridiculous lie I've ever seen, because I'm well aware that the actual fluoride is highly toxic, highly poisonous, and it has been used during the war, World War II. It was known to have been put in the water systems deliberately to dumb people down. And again, this appears to be something very similar in regards to a massive attack on humanity using the byproduct chemicals that should be getting rid of, but it has a far more nefarious effect. And this seems to be what they're using.
It's a great example. Many people don't know the connection between the aluminum and the fluoride. The two are bonded together until they're separated through the smelting process. So they don't mind coming back together. They're like family. They want to bond back together like they originally were. And so you've got aluminum in your deodorant, okay, or in your inoculations, in your shots, or in other aspects such as the air, right? And it's important to understand how to detox these things. You can chelate and remove these things from your body, or also you can be highly mineralized. So what I like to recommend to people is to take bioavailable plant-based minerals like seaweeds. I like to take a sea moss regimen which is just a seaweed, and it's sea moss, bladderwrack, and burdock. And then I get 118 bioavailable minerals that I need on a daily basis. And so ideally, I'm not mineral deficient, because if I'm mineral deficient, I'm absorbing toxins from my environment where my body thinks, oh, well, maybe that radioactive strontium is actually the calcium that I need in my bones. And then I'm absorbing this from my toxic air or environment, and I shouldn't be. But if I was up to speed on my minerals through taking bioavailable supplements, I wouldn't be so absorptive, and I, wouldn't be so toxic. Also, chelation through spirulina and all these sort of different aspects where you can consult your naturopath and whatnot are important. But
Yep.
the fluoride, which is in the water or the toothpaste, and you got to get rid of your toothpaste if you've got fluoride in it. And no excuses. You can find a substitute online. You can actually make your own toothpaste. It's just a few ingredients. Yep. There's a lot of different things that you can do. But when you get the fluoride in your blood, it's nano-sized and can bypass your blood-brain barrier. And it gets into your brain. And then it pulls the aluminum that gets in your blood from other sources. It'll pull the aluminum through the blood-brain barrier, and the two will interact in your brain. Little explosions occur. And I believe that this is one of the leading factors causing the rise in dementia and Alzheimer's, the #1 cause of death in the UK now, which is unbelievable that's now the #1 cause of death. So that's worth wrapping your head around and understanding. And then literally, knowledge is power. You can detox, take these things from your life, learn about mineralization, and be fully empowered. Also, Naval Research Studies in the 1970s did over 3,000 studies on EMF fields. And what they were doing with rats is injecting dye into the rat's blood and then showing that they could break down the blood-brain barrier with EMF fields. So the more EMF they exposed the rats to, the more they could break down their blood-brain barrier, which protects your brain from toxins that you may get in your blood, such as the aluminum in the aerosols. So the EMF from the 5G will break down your blood-brain barrier and then open it, make it more permeable for the aluminum constituents and whatnot, and then you get the metallics in your brain that way. So there's all these different ways that you can learn where less is more. Less EMF is better on your health. Learn about grounding, learn about detoxing, learn about all these things so that you can prevent getting a metal brain and becoming a robot like everyone else.
Yeah, definitely recommend that for everyone. Now, this is a global phenomenon, and therefore it has to be a central controlling body for it. Who would you say that is?
Well, you've got, NATO, the World Economic Forum, you've got all the UN, stuff like that. But the US military kind of runs the world. And if you don't bow down to them, they'll come in and give you um, a, what do you call it, a federal bank or whatever. Like, I don't think that countries that don't want to do it can just say no. You know, they're told what to do, and if they don't do it, then they're going to get sprayed anyways. So people just have to get in line.
Yeah.
But that's a great question. Like the WHO, it's like how could they be doing it over country because it doesn't mind, it doesn't abide by country borders or anything like that. Like they don't just turn off the sprayers when they hit Canada coming from the US, you know what I mean? So it's above governments. And that's why I find problems with the mainstream telling us now that there's states in the US that have banned chemtrails, like Tennessee. That's great if it's empowering you, but also it's most likely convincing you that the problem can be solved by writing your politician and petitioning your politician that the politics is going to get you somewhere. Tennessee is not going to stop chemtrails, and nor has it stopped in Tennessee. But people around the world think that there's these successes and that they can now continue just to sit at home and write their politician and that it's okay. No, we need grassroots activism, waking people up everywhere. Like it's like this. Monsanto and GMO foods were hush and nobody knew anything about them at one point. But then there was March Against Monsanto and there were activists, and activists got loud and they protested, simultaneous protests in over 400 cities all around the world. They had marches. And now when I go to the grocery store, it's labeled. And if I know how to read the barcodes, I can tell this is GMO and this is organic. And I have organic labels. And the concept of GMO and Monsanto is common knowledge, even though Monsanto no longer exists and was gobbled up by Bayer for $66.6 billion. Right. And what a conflict of interest.
What a funny number to choose. And the fact that Bayer were also the very company that helped produce Zyklon B for the gas chambers during the Second World War. What a great company to take on board, a genetically modified food company.
Mm-hmm. So Monsanto wasn't known. Activists got involved. It took them time and energy, but now we know. And we're just like that with chemtrails. But our population is very much asleep. So we have to meet our audience where they're at and choose our battles wisely. And so we have to use our voice. Our voice is very powerful. And so it's up to everyone. If you have that torch of knowledge, share it with your friends, your children, your family, your peers. Don't be shy because actually your neighbor might actually be on the same page as you and you don't even realize it. But it's up to us to be that voice of pressure because just like Monsanto activists, we are now those activists in this realm and space. It's not as easy because it's not our tangible food being genetically engineered. You know, you splice a potato and put a lobster gene in there. You know, people are going to know, especially with the glyphosate. The glyphosate is just mind-boggling. They had to genetically alter the vegetables so that they wouldn't just die from being sprayed with this herbicide. Otherwise, they would shrivel up and just die from this poison, which is very toxic and causes cancer and has been proven to cause cancer in humans. So that was a little bit more easier, but still the activists are playing their part, and we're having protests and we're getting involved, and in time there will be a rising consciousness. The consciousness is rising. People are waking up every single day on the chemtrail topic, but it takes people convincing them to look at the sky with the open lens and the open eyes and open mind, and it's up to us. It's up to everyone involved, which
That,
you're involved if you're listening to this podcast.
that's it. And people should share this. People should talk about this, because at the end of the day, with what's coming, and we know what's coming, people need to start forming communities now where people can stand together, not only in the knowledge, but in the power to stop this happening. And I really do believe that that's what people need to do. Don't be afraid to speak to people. Don't be afraid to talk to your neighbors, because as you said, they very much might have some information that might be good for you. And they probably understand what you're talking about. The world has become, certainly in the past 4 years, a very, very informative place to wake a lot of people up. And together, I think we can make a huge change and a huge difference. But all we have to do is share these things and talk these things through. Now, we've seen a couple of periods in our lifetime of aircraft being grounded. 9/11 and the pandemic were two that I can think of immediately. Was there any noticeable difference seen or recorded during these times to the difference of what was being sprayed in the skies?
People reported during the lockdowns that the beautiful blue skies came back and the fluffy clouds came back. Um, Also, I saw in the mainstream that the claim was that the global warming situation was paused because people stopped flying their planes and because everyone's locked in their homes and all that sort of stuff, which I don't buy. But definitely, when the planes aren't flying, the natural system comes back. A lot of people ask me, how much time would it take if they stop spraying? And then also I've seen the mainstream media say once they start, they can't stop. Once they start geoengineering, they can't stop, or it'll wreak havoc and everything will fall apart. The hydrological system is very intelligent. God had a design, Gaia, whatever you want to call it, the universe. It is perfectly able to adjust to us not spraying it with poison anymore. Okay. It'll take about 24 hours, and the hydrological system knows exactly how to act and do, and it fills in the gaps, and where it's needed, it ushers it in, and it's a beautiful thing. There's not anything that needs to be worried about. If it stops, stopping it is what needs to be done.
Yeah, that's it. Now, even if everyone became aware of this happening and the information got out there and every household, let's say for some reason, this ended up on mainstream news and it was all admitted to, do you think it would enact resolve, or would we just see how many people out there just don't care?
If it reached the point where everyone was talking about it, it would leak into those that are involved. There's drone operators. There's where I live. There's an agriculture inspection when you go from state to state. So I have
Yeah,
to stop, and they ask me, do you have any fruits and vegetables? You're coming into California, and one of the guards there once, he pulled me aside because I give chemtrail flyers to everybody I meet. He pulled me aside, and I ended up having lunch together and became friends. And his best friend works at one of these bases that are secret, and he loads the canisters on the planes. He wants to be a whistleblower, okay, but he knows what happens to whistleblowers. There's no such thing as whistleblowers anymore. There's no whistleblower protection acts. Like, whistleblowers that actually are out there are likely controlled, in my opinion. And we all know that if you really are blowing the whistle, that because you were already working for them, you've pretty much sold your soul, and you will likely lose your life, and maybe your family loses their life. But if it became mainstream enough, those involved could stand up and speak up and protest, and things could actually happen. It would be revealed what's happening, from where, when it's going on, who's involved, and funding could be cut, and all sorts of things could happen if it reached the level of consciousness that it needs to reach.
yeah. If we have all the proof now to demonstrably expose this, without question whatsoever. Why have we not seen legal challenges by the public against being poisoned in an attempt to take this practice of spraying down?
Well, we don't have enough proof. We need, I mean, like, I was hoping one of these drones would crash, honestly. You know, like having a drone with the compressed chemicals on it and then analyze the chemicals and be like, look, we're being sprayed with lithium. Here it is, compressed in an air canister from a drone that was over my neighborhood. That would be more substantial. People have tried to bring it to the court levels, and there's no admission. There's not enough people like acknowledging it. It's still under the realm of conspiracy theorist. And at the at the end of the day, we really just need enough people stepping up and speaking up, and the research needs to surface. But there's a lot really. So I don't think we're at the point where it's common knowledge yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If you could say anything to encourage people, where all the whistleblowers from the military, the manufacturing and production of this, the aircraft engineers, those who are retrofitting aircraft, those who are drone piloting such aircraft, to the point where this can give testament, what would you say to them to encourage them to step forward without fear to bring about this change that is required?
Well, first they're on a need to know basis and they're compartmentalized, but also at the end of the day, they are told that they're saving the world. So they think that they're doing something top secret, but it's for the benefit of humanity. So the first thing that I would do is educate them on the facts
Yeah.
that they're causing the problem to create a bigger problem, and that they're actually being treasonous, and that their government is not what they think. I mean, it's literally we're in maybe World War II has been extended, and we're playing the slow game, and people don't realize that it's an attack on humanity, that they're attacking their own people. So I would say that firstly, but also I would say that karma and God is watching, and that there's blood on their hands, and is that going to work? I don't know. A lot of these for the military. I think that they're just mind controlled, that they don't really grasp what's actually happening because of their compartmentalized need to know basis, the aspects of it all. But at the end, they need to know that they're killing themselves and they're killing the trees. When you spray aluminum on these trees, you prevent the trees from being able to uptake water, and you're creating drought-stricken trees that are now flammable. Also, aluminum oxide and barium salts. These are patented fire accelerants. These fire accelerants are being sprayed on our forests. Okay, you're creating a horrible situation where then arsons are paid to light fires, or accidental fires are happening, which is highly unlikely, I mean, in my opinion, or lightning is being precipitated, which is patented and very well documented. And then these fires are causing all these problems, destroying towns, and like the Maui situation, all this sort of stuff. Like it's treason. They're actually acting treasonously, but they're just following orders, so they think that they're doing a good thing. But I would actually like to educate them, and if they were fully educated, I believe that there would be people going AWOL and wanting to spread the truth. You don't, when you're in the thick of it and you're working for the military, you don't really realize how nefarious it is.
Yeah. And anybody watching this today, anybody out there who wants to come forward, who wants to be a whistleblower, you can reach out to myself or you can reach out to Matt. We'll get you in touch, and it can be completely anonymous, and you'll get your story out there. We'll get your story told. We'll expose exactly what's going on without any repercussions to yourself. So don't worry about that. So Matt Landman, many thanks. The links are going to be in the description for your website, so people can contact you directly and see your work. I want people to like and share this and educate others, because this is a very important thing that people should be made aware of. And as always, here on the Atlantic Underground podcast, as we say, believe nothing and question everything. And I think that's a wrap. Thanks very much, Matt. This has been absolutely incredible.
Thank you very much for having me on. And I just want to say one more thing. Truth is a frequency. And so once you start to elevate to this vibration of truth, which is chemtrails, other truths are available on that path, on that vibration. You just have to open yourself and be able to acknowledge that truth is a frequency where other truths reside, and we'll be there waiting for you. And thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's been incredible. Look forward to speaking to you soon. And I can't wait to see the next episode of your documentary coming out, Frankenskies 2. And I hope many people watch the first one and anticipate this next one as well. Thanks again. Take care, brother. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.